The age-old debate in fantasy football. Honestly, it's probably my favorite one. Player talent versus scheme of the team. I mean, I personally, I always go towards the scheme preferred over player talent, but hey, this is Level Up Fantasy Football Podcast, episode 4. It is your boy Natter alongside the Tip. Man, how you doing over
Bro, good, man. Doing a little remodeling in the room, so
there?
hopefully it comes to life in the next couple of weeks. But
Mm.
I'm excited about this show, man. I can't believe we got the Marcus Grant on here, guys. NFL Network, Fantasy Life with Matthew Berry. Got to meet him at the Fantasy Football Expo last year. I hope he goes again because just a cool, chill dude to hang out with. Talked about sneakers, kicks for a minute. Just a fun time. Marcus, man, thank you for coming on. Just welcome and appreciate you coming on in short notice too.
Yeah, man. No, thank you guys for having me on. My plan is to be back at the expo again in August. I know that Bob Lung has reached out to me about it, so it's been a good time. I'd love to go back.
Yeah, guys, we're gonna have Bob Lung on here as well on the Level Up Fantasy Football Show. So take a look at the Fantasy Football Expo. I can't speak enough about it. A lot of people would like to call the place in Anaheim, California, or in Orlando the happiest place on earth. I got to think that the Fantasy Football Expo has to be on that list for me, at least, because I was happy the whole day. Like, everybody was probably getting sick of my Kool-Aid, cheese, and smile, but I tell you what, man, I had a fun time.
It's fantasy Coachella. That's how I describe it. It's like fantasy football Coachella. Yeah,
That's one way to put it. But as much as I like to yap on a microphone, I'm a very introverted person, so I always kind of like get scared of big groups and stuff like that, and I just get nervous. Honestly, it feels weird.
I'll say this. It's sort of like being in a bunch of small groups all together, right? Because, I mean, like, yeah, you mingle and you meet other people, but eventually you have, a handful of people that you just want to hang out with and vibe with. And so, yeah, there's a big gathering and there's lots and lots of people. But in the meantime, you're also kind of like hanging out in your own little small group for the most part, too.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
no, it is amazing. I'll just give a quick story, real quick, Natter. Hung out with Marcus. We ate lunch at one of the little, I don't know, they got a bunch of sports complexes over there, sports cafes and stuff. Had some really cool drinks there. Left a little tingly in my tongue. The drink was pretty dope. But yeah, man, got to hang out with him, pick his brain a little bit, talk to him, and like I said, coolest, nicest dude on the planet. Again, so happy to have you on. Go ahead, Natter.
sheesh. All right, so we're on a time limit here because Mr. Marcus, he's a busy guy. We aren't as busy as it. He's just a busy guy, and the main topic of discussion is player talent versus scheme fit, because obviously now that free agency not necessarily is done, but for the most part has went by, a lot of new player talent has been acquired and left the original scheme that they were on. And I always look back and try to remember the players that left their original team and then outperformed their ADP. And honestly, when you realistically look at it, the list isn't that long, in my opinion. I mean, right now, unless you're looking at premier talents, like, for example, Stephon Diggs going to the Bills, he outperformed his ADP when he left to the Vikings. DeAndre Hopkins leaving the Texans to the Cardinals outperformed his ADP. But then there's a lot of players that didn't outperform their ADP, specifically running backs. Usually running backs are when they're drafted by the team, in my opinion, a lot of the time it becomes scheme fits. Probably the latest big name player that left their original team and then completely tanked would probably be closer to Aaron Rodgers. Him leaving the Green Bay Packers, leaving 2 MVP seasons, going to the Jets. I mean, of course, there's an Achilles tear. That kind of shows me how much of a scheme fit a player becomes in that system, especially because before LaFleur came to the Packers, I don't want to say Aaron Rodgers was considered washed, but he had probably his 2 statistical worst years, minus the ones with the Jets, before LaFleur came. So, I mean, a lot of the times I feel like coaching, scheme fit, and the system around you is a lot of the times much more important than the player. But Marcus, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that's true. I am more of a team fit guy than necessarily a talent guy. Although I will say this, I think some of it, I think it applies more when you're talking about young players, right? When you're talking about draft picks, I think it has a more of an impact. I think when you're talking about free agents and guys changing teams, you can generally look at a guy and see that, hey, you know what? He might kind of be washed. And I think there was that thought a little bit with Aaron Rodgers. I think we sort of hoped. I think the talk with Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets, to use your example, was, hey, man, it can't be any worse than Zach Wilson was, right? Like, we were excited for Garrett Wilson because, hey, man, even if Aaron Rodgers isn't the same MVP guy, he's better than what they've had the last few years. Then he plays 4 snaps, he tears his Achilles, he comes back this past year, and he looked like a shell of himself. So I think in that regard, we sort of know, right? You look at a guy like Keenan Allen, for instance, going from the Chargers to the Bears, and everything looks great. They got a new quarterback. They've got all this talent that they think on offense is going to be great. But we also sort of knew, like, Keenan Allen is sort of getting up there in years. And I think what we saw from him last year was about what I expected. Maybe the numbers were a little bit lower, but it wasn't like what we saw from Keenan Allen was completely unexpected. So I am very much more like, especially when we talk about, we go through the combine and we go through draft season and everybody gets hyped on a guy who, has a great combine or runs a great 40 time, whatever. And I'm like, great. Let me see where he lands. And, like he could be amazing. Javonte Williams, I know he was on the show sheet to talk about, right? Javonte Williams, a dude I loved coming out of North Carolina. He goes to Denver. They have Melvin Gordon. It never worked out the way I wanted it to, So I think that goes a long way.
Now, Tip, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, no, it definitely means, where they're going to go, who they're playing with, the team fit, the continuity with the team. But I also look at the offensive coordinator or the philosophy that offense or defense, if you want to go with IDP, depending on where that philosophy is. If that philosophy meets that player, then I also look at that too. So I look at, okay, this Javonte Williams, let's talk about him. It seems to me that, okay, they need a running back. Jerry Jones wasn't going to pay the money that it took to get Derrick Henry, although Derrick Henry would have given him a pay cut. But all that situation that they went through last year with, Rico Dowdle and then, having Ezekiel Elliott come, like all of that situation's out the window now. Javonte Williams should take a hold of this team. I understand Miles Sanders is there too. I'm not worried too much about him. That offensive line was what I was concerned about. And I actually looked back at Matt Patanti's football rankings for football guys or the offensive lines. And the Dallas Cowboys finished inside the top 15, which isn't bad. It's right in the middle. But hey, if they get a few extra pieces, I know they lost Zach Martin, and he was on the squad last year. So that's a big loss. But if they go ahead and get some of these pieces together and the offensive line together, I think Javonte Williams could have a pretty good season. I'm not going to sit here and say, 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns. But an RB2, RB3, I think he could be one of those guys that could fit for you. He catches the ball out of the backfield. He runs hard. Contact is his speed, his playability. It's really good to see him play out with this Dallas Cowboys team. I'm excited to see it. I like some of the things I saw from Denver. He just never really got the opportunity because Sean Payton either didn't like him, had too many guys in the stable, like whatever the situation may have been. But I think Javonte Williams could be one of those guys who can help you in your team this year.
I mean, he did come off an ACL tear. I'm sure they're trying to make sure his workload isn't crazy wild. I'm still salty at the Cowboys for getting rid of Rico Dowdle. He ruined a lot of dynasty fantasy teams with that play right there. There's some moves that, I just can't forgive. That one is one of them. Now, but you know what? While I do think Javonte Williams' fantasy draft stock did go up, in my opinion, I think DK Metcalf's absolutely plummeted to the point where, like, you couldn't offer me a second rounder for him. And like, if somebody said, hey, I got DK Metcalf, give me a dynasty second rounder for him, I'd probably say, no, I don't want him. No quarterback. I mean, in theory, Pittsburgh always has a phenomenal deep bomb receiver. Historically, they've always had it. Now, if DK went to the Ravens, I'd say, all right, his career's cooked fantasy wise. That's it. Any receiver going to the Ravens, your career's cooked. It's done. But they've always had a phenomenal deep thrower of the football. They don't really have that. If Russell Wilson was the quarterback with DK, I would have been like, all right, cool, I'll take it. But right now, Marcus, what do you think?
I mean, I'm with you. I think the one guy that could make this offense work at quarterback is the quarterback they don't seem to want.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like I think, you get DK on one side, you get George Pickens on the other side, and you have two guys who can stretch the field. You want that Russell Wilson moonball there, but it seems like they want no parts of it. So for that reason, I'm sort of down on DK. The other part of it is you've got Arthur Smith there as the offensive coordinator. And say what you want about him as a head coach. It was a nightmare down in Atlanta. Trust me, I was banging the Kyle Pitts drum for 3-4 years and it never worked out. But he's not a bad offensive coordinator. I mean, we saw that for his years in Tennessee. The problem is he's going to want to run the football. He's going to want to run the football a lot. And so that is going to work against DK Metcalf. So I'm sort of out on him because of those two things. Although I'll say this. Obviously, they don't seem to want to bring back Russ. They'll never do it. But I think the other guy that could maybe make this thing go would be Jameis Winston.
Ooh. So I was on the high hopes that Jameis Winston would be a Raider. That didn't happen. I was kind of.
Are you a Raider fan? Let me ask
No,
you.
I hate the Raiders.
Okay,
Everybody
I'm the Raiders fan. You two are the 49ers fan, and we'll get to that in a moment. So I'm the Raiders fan. Go ahead, Natter.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I thought you were going to say Marcus. Aaron Rodgers going there would probably make it work.
No, like that's too much. That's too many head cases in one place, right? Because you got George Pickens, who I don't know if you guys watched Severance at all. If you watch it, few who watch it, they'll get the reference. I am on the opinion that George Pickens is a severed employee, and that every now and then the whistle blows and his innie comes out and he gets freaked out, and that's why he does like unhinged things on the field, because like there's this other personality who doesn't really know what's going on, so he freaks out a little bit. So you got George Pickens on one side, you got DK, who seems to be a little bit of a head case at times on the other. You can't bring in Aaron Rodgers. Like, you can't have all three of those personalities together. This is just not going to work. At least with Russ, he's worked with both those guys. He played with Pickens last year. He played with DK in Seattle, so he could sort of figure out how to manage it. And Jameis would work just because those two guys would start squabbling, and Jameis would say something like so off the wall ridiculous that they'd be like, "What the hell are you talking about, man?" And then it would just be okay. But Aaron Rodgers, just that you might as well just set a fire to the entire facility if you bring Aaron Rodgers in.
Imagine the conspiracy theories that you can get from those guys. It'd be great.
I want to see it because I want to see Mike Tomlin handle this. Because last year we looked at what Mike Tomlin did in the middle of the season, dumping Justin Fields and putting it in Wilson. It just looked like a situation that I was like, man, is this really going to work out for him? Ultimately, it did. They got to the playoffs. They didn't do much, but it kind of worked for them. I mean, they didn't miss the playoffs like everybody was projecting. So I would love to see it just because I want to see how, okay, you did it last year, but now you bring in Aaron Rodgers with these guys, or you keep Russell Wilson with these guys. It's something that I want to see Coach Mike Tomlin do or handle again. It's just so fun to watch him do it.
So I already think Mike Tomlin is top 2 coach in the NFL. That's top 2. I'm putting top 2. Him and Andy Reid, top 2. The way
I was going to ask who the other one was.
Yeah,
that was my guess.
the way Mike Tomlin handles personalities, and they usually don't become as big as nutcases until they leave the Steelers. For example, Antonio Brown. He seemed a little odd, but he didn't seem as unhinged until he left the Steelers. Him and Le'Veon Bell, they seemed, maybe had some contract disputes, want a little bit more money, had a little personality here. It wasn't until they left where we really saw that full CTE potential, or whatever, joke you would want to make there. But I think if Aaron Rodgers was to go to the Steelers and they look like a cohesive offense, or they look like their personalities weren't showing, I'd probably honestly slate him as like an elite Hall of Fame level head coach that can really handle these type of discipline.
I mean, look, I know the whole big thing is he's never had a losing season, and that's, I mean, it's an amazing accomplishment, right? Like, you got to respect the hell out of it. I think, though, at some point, if you're the Steelers, you kind of have to bottom out, right? Because right now, the Steelers are sort of living in that NFL purgatory, which is the worst place to be, where they are not good enough. They're not good enough to really contend for a Super Bowl, right? Like, you look at the teams in the AFC, the Chiefs are still going to be good. The Bills, I don't know about the Bengals. They may not have any defense this year, but you're going to have, some good teams in the AFC, and the Steelers, the Ravens are up there. The Steelers aren't really among that group, but they're also not bad enough to get a really high draft pick and really start stockpiling picks.
Yeah.
So they're going to end up every year, they're going to end up drafting around 19, 20, 21. So you're not going to get any of the top prospects. You're not going to be able to go out and get yourself that franchise-changing quarterback that you really need. So you're going to just be hanging around this world where you're good enough to make the playoffs, but not good enough to really win anything, and you just never really improve.
And that's, it's a really interesting point that you make, because they're good enough to make the playoffs, not good enough to beat Mahomes, but they're also not bad enough to rebuild, like you mentioned. And would you just say, all righty, let's rebuild? Or all right, now I was gonna, this is the segment for later, but would you force Shedeur Sanders?
I think I think the Steelers, as long as they have winning records, of course they want to win a Super Bowl. Of course, I mean that's the ultimate goal. But as long as they keep winning these records, and as long as they keep their fans alive, their fans travel, their fans, their fans, I think it's just going to continue to be that vicious cycle like Marcus is talking about, because there hasn't been, they always draft well. Even if they get one of those first round picks or later picks in the first round, they still draft really well. They draft to the needs of their team. They do a good job with that. So that's just one of those things where they're going to keep getting these really good players in there. They're going to keep making the playoffs, but missing an opportunity. But I think all they want is that opportunity when they get to the playoffs, because hell, anything can happen when you get to the playoffs, truthfully. But you just never know. I mean, look at the Cincinnati Bengals back when Carson Palmer was there playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he tears his ACL. Anything can happen, guys. And so it's just one of those situations where I think that they are comfortable in that.
I guess. I think Steeler fans, they've been calling for Mike Tomlin to be fired for years, to which I sort of say, be careful what you wish for, because there's no guarantee that you're going to find somebody as good as Mike Tomlin out there. Like, the Steelers have been a picture of consistency. Like, I am 47 years old. The Steelers have had 3 coaches my entire life. That's it. You know what I'm saying? So be careful what you wish for. But I do think at some point, they make the playoffs. And I guess in theory, anything can happen. But you just look at these teams, and there's nothing about the Steelers the last few years that has given you any real idea, any real threat that they're going to make a run, right? You never get the sense that they're better than the Bills or the Ravens or the Chiefs. You just, maybe they win a first round matchup, maybe they don't, but that's kind of it right now.
Exactly. So to keep it a little bit more fantasy related, I kind of wanted to ask a couple of free agency signings that happened, and I want you to see, a quick one, if their fantasy stock rised or fell due to the signing. Like, for example, Devontae Adams. He's now on the Rams, and I know he's like a bigger name guy, a little bit maybe on that back end of his career, but on the Rams, I think that's pretty dangerous personally. But Mr. Grant, how do you feel about it?
I don't know.
I feel the same. I don't know.
I really don't. I don't know. Like, I'm gonna let you jump in first, because I'm still sort of kind of gathering my thoughts.
Devontae Adams goes.
Yeah, Devontae Adams on the Rams.
I love the move. I do. I think that this is a situation where Cooper Kupp, I think Devontae Adams could be a better Cooper Kupp, maybe better than what we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, he's probably better than Cooper.
What we've seen the last couple of years, right? I mean, we can all agree on that. I'm not sitting here saying Devontae Adams will be a 1,900-yard receiver. It's Puka's team. Like, there's no question about that. So I think that Devontae Adams will have a role in this offense, and a significant role, because they need it. They need a significant player in that offense. So I think Devontae Adams will be one. I'm looking at him as like an RB3, but I think he can get into the wide receiver 3, but get into that wide receiver 2 category possibly by the end of the year. But that's that's where I'll go as far as with Devontae Adams. But I think the fit is good. He still has a route running, guys. I mean, he put some moves on people last year several times with Aaron Rodgers, and he still has those moves. Yes, he's another year older. We got to worry about that, so it could fall off at any point. But I don't think with what he does and the way he uses his skill set, I think it can translate for a couple of years, at least 2 to 3 more years. So that's something that I think that the Rams are looking for. They're looking for an impact player to come in and help this offense. They lost a stud in Cooper Kupp. He just couldn't stay healthy, and I think Devontae Adams will help that.
Yeah, I mean, like I think he could be a wide receiver too. I think that's going to happen for sure. The thing we know, Matthew Stafford can support multiple wide receivers. We've seen it for years. Yeah. We saw it. We saw it those years in LA when it was Kupp and Robert Woods, and it was Kupp and now Puka Nacua. So I think that part's going to be fine. I think when everything's right, he's still one of the best receivers in the league. I think the biggest question for the Rams is the status of Matthew Stafford. Can you keep him healthy? Does that decline come? They've sort of been able to avoid it because with quarterbacks, it's not a steady decline. They tend to just fall off a cliff. And so, the Rams have been able to sort of avoid it to this point, and they paid him big money because they looked around and they're like, we can't have Jimmy Garoppolo trying to lead us right now when we have a real window at something. So, I wouldn't mind having Devontae as my wide receiver too in fantasy. It's not, he's not the top 10 guy. I don't think that he once was, but I think he definitely slides in and fills in where Cooper Kupp was starting to decline a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the two things could still be true. I mean, he could still not be the player he once was, but he could still be a proper fit for a team. I mean, last year, through the disastrous offense that was the Jets, he still had 85 catches for 1,000 yards. It's not as it's still nothing to, just scoff at, considering he finished in fantasy wise around the likes of Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, Ladd McConkey, Jackson Smith and Jigba and all that stuff. So, I mean, him on the Rams with that offense and that offensive scheme, if he put up 7-8 touchdowns, 1,300 yards, I wouldn't be surprised. But, at the same time, if he put up 50 catches for 750 yards and maybe 2 touchdowns, I don't think any of us would be that surprised either.
I'll say this. It'll be better than, remember when they signed Allen Robinson a few years ago? Yes, we got all excited and it was an absolute disaster. Yes. It'll be better than that.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I really hope it's better than that. And I mean, you mentioned earlier that, the Matthew Stafford and the Rams have supported multiple wide receiver ones. But, people a lot of times forget Brandon Cooks was also a wide receiver one on that team with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. So, I mean, I have no issue with multiple wide receivers in that offense because they always do it with Todd Gurley as well. Tip, anybody else you got, Tip?
I just keep looking at I'm going to be a homer here, guys. I keep looking at Geno Smith a little bit. And it's funny because I know what Pete Carroll is going to do. I'm a Raiders fan. I know what Pete Carroll is going to do. He's going to get a good running back in this draft. He's going to get one of those guys. And once he gets one of those running backs, solidify this offensive line. He wants to run the ball. That's what Pete Carroll's MO is, run. But I feel like Geno Smith could be one of those players that gets you some yardage running. And not only that, he has a guy in Brock Bowers that, stud right then and there. He's got a guy in Jacoby Myers. He's got some weapons here, guys. Now, look, now listen to this. This is not a guy that I'm telling you to go and draft in a single quarterback league. It is, if you're a 2-quarterback league, a lot of people might pass on the Geno situation. They look at his age. They look at the up and down seasons he's had before. Although he's had 2 good back-to-back seasons, they were decent. But they're going to look at there. They're going to look at his name. I think Geno Smith can be one of those guys, kind of like Baker Mayfield, who surprised us last year. I don't think he's going to put up Baker Mayfield numbers and have 40 touchdowns or anything, but I think he surprises us just a little bit because I'm telling you 2 things right now. Pete Carroll, they're focusing on this offensive line. They're focusing on the trenches altogether. They've got rid of some of our back end guys, some of our safety help, but they're going to focus on this trenches because they want to build this team from the trenches on out. And that's what they're going to do. And once they do that, when they get that solidified, I think Geno Smith will be a player that we look at again. And remember, he always has that little rushing upside. It's not anything crazy like what we see from Justin Fields or Lamar Jackson or anyone like that. but it's going to give you a good 400 yards rushing and maybe a couple of touchdowns. So he's always going to give you a little bit of that too. So 2 QB leagues, I'm all in on Geno Smith right now.
I ain't touching him. But Marcus, how do you feel?
I mean, I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be the same guy that he has been, where he's kind of a borderline QB1. He's a matchup-based guy. I mean, they got Bowers, they got Jacoby Myers. To Tip's point, they're going to run the football a lot. So I don't think I feel any differently about Geno Smith now than I did, 2 weeks ago. I think he's going to be just about the same guy that he previously was.
Yeah.
Why don't you? Well, Natter, what's up? Well, why don't you like him at all?
He's on the Raiders.
QB league.
He's trash. Like he'll probably go to jail soon, just like how all the other Raiders do. And when he does, David would make sure to call them.
Wow.
So we're gonna, due to the time constraints, we're gonna have to go to the question of the day. And Tip, do you wanna read this one out for us?
I sure will. All right. So I got two 49ers fans here. So I'm sandwiched in between these guys. So I want to know, with the current state that the 49ers are in heading into the draft, after letting go of Deebo Samuel, specifically after a subpar year, what's the state of this franchise for you guys? We'll start with you, Marcus.
Yeah, they're just in flux right now. I thought they would be a little more aggressive in free agency. They were talking about a month ago about trying to keep the band back together. Then all of a sudden they ship out Deebo Samuel. They let a whole lot of guys go. I think they're just trying to rebuild. Now, I think, they still have to figure out how to pay Brock Purdy. This draft is going to tell you a lot about where the franchise is going to be in the next couple of years. If they nail it with this draft, I think they stay competitive. If not, I think you start to see them dismantle things even more and really go through a true rebuild. So I was a little bit surprised. I think a little bit disappointed. But I'd say if you're talking about winners and losers fantasy-wise in free agency, Jawan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, I think both win because they're going to get a lot of opportunity with no Deebo there this year.
I love Ricky Pearsall, guys. I think that he really is going to have a shot to surprise a lot of people, especially where his ADP is currently. It's going to only start rising, especially as close to training camp comes. And if you're doing drafts right after the actual NFL drafts, take advantage of that because Ricky Pearsall is going to be there. I do have a follow-up question, Natter. Christian McCaffrey, and then we'll go back to Marcus on this. So Christian McCaffrey this year, what's up? Are you in, out, or what are you doing with him?
I think I'm in on. I mean, shoot, it depends where. I mean, everybody's got a price, but if you're still looking like 104, 105 ADP, I think that would be my guess on where he actually goes.
Oof.
I'd probably do it.
Oof.
I'll say this: I did a mock draft with a bunch of folks the other day. He fell to 2.8. I got him at 2.8.
No way, 2.8.
Absolutely. I was like, at 2.8. I'm like, absolutely doing that. 100%.
Smash.
I can see in the second round that late.
I don't think he gets in the first round. I think he falls out of the first round. I didn't think he'd fall that far into the second. And once he did, I was like, well, yeah, man, I'm gonna do that.
But Marcus, once the season gets closer and training camp gets in, he's in like tremendous shape. You're gonna hear it. I'm in the best shape of my life. You're gonna hear it. So people, it's gonna start creeping up, man.
For sure. I'll leave you with this because I'm gonna have to pull the shoot on this one. I think the sharps, the folks like us, are going to be scared off from him just because of the injury history and the way the Niners offense looks. But as always happens, when the casual folks start getting in like August, they're going to say Christian McCaffrey. They're going to start smashing that button, and that ADP is going to come up.
100%. Marcus, let us know where we can find you. Appreciate you.
Best place is on Blue Sky. I'm not really on the other place so much anymore, but Marcus G, MARCASG there. Still doing the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast a couple times a week. Also doing some stuff with Matt Berry's Fantasy Life. I'm also doing a March Madness show, so you can check that out. If you have an LG Smart TV on the LG channels, every Tuesday a March Madness basketball show. That's what it is.
Got it.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, fellas.
Have a good one, guys.
We'll see you.
All right.
Nice.
There we go.